The Young and the Restless Spoilers recap Tuesday, July 15, 2025. A garden can be a place of peace, of reflection, of quiet beauty. But not this one. Not in nice. Not when secrets bloom faster than roses and danger slithers beneath every trellis. In the lush, manicured maze behind the Dumas estate, where marble statues cast long shadows and silence is enforced by fear, a single act of violence shattered the illusion forever. Cain, a man already teetering on the edge of betrayal, redemption, and death, stumbled between hedges, clutching his side where warm blood seeped through silk. The knife had come from behind, swift and deliberate, slicing through muscle, severing the last thread of Cain Ashby's unraveling empire. And in the final cruel twist of fate, as Damien fell, he landed squarely against Cain himself. The man he had once served, now stunned, stained in crimson, and caught in a tableau that no one could unsee. Except someone had seen it. Phyllis Summers, prowling the grounds out of suspicion or perhaps instinct, emerged just in time to witness the horror, Damien collapsing onto Cain, blood spreading like a bloom across his back, the glint of the blade vanishing behind twisted foliage. Her gasp was audible. Her instincts screamed to run. But her eyes were locked on the grotesque poetry of what she saw. Cain's hands were up, his mouth forming words, of protest, of confusion, of defense. Phyllis couldn't tell. Her heart raced, her feet frozen. And then, as if drawn by fate's cruel hand, Nick Newman arrived. What he saw would haunt him forever. It wasn't the blood. It wasn't the shock of seeing Cain cradling Damien's fallen body. It was something worse, something personal, primal. Perhaps it was the expression on Cain's face, not of guilt or panic, but calculation. Perhaps it was Damien's final glance upward, not begging for help, but seeking absolution. Or perhaps it was what came next, a murmur, a whisper from Damien's lips as the last breath escaped him. A name. A warning. Something only Nick heard, and something he would never repeat. But it changed everything. Nick staggered back, bile rising in his throat. He didn't know if Cain had killed Damien, or if someone else had used the chaos to strike, but it didn't matter. The truth was dead. Buried beneath decades of lies and half-truths. And now, the only thing Nick knew for certain was that he needed to get out and get help. But the estate was a prison. The gates locked. The signals jammed. And somewhere within the villa, the true killer still watched. Back in Genoa City, storm clouds were brewing on another front. Jack Abbott, weary and bitter, had finally reached his limit with Billy. The latest news from Europe, whispers of Chancellor sabotage, murmurs of Victor Newman once again dragged into family war, convinced Jack of one truth: his brother would never change. Not really. The startup he had funded, meant to be a redemption arc, had turned into a sideshow of grudges and ego. Jack no longer saw potential in Billy's ideas. He saw threats. So when Billy proposed another expansion, another risk, Jack didn't hesitate. He pulled out. Quietly, surgically, with the same precision he had once used against business rivals. The message was clear: grow up, or grow alone. But Billy, ever defiant, didn't beg. He didn't shout. He simply smirked, as if expecting the betrayal, and doubled down on his mission. Jack wasn't sure if that made him more dangerous or just more pathetic. Either way, the fallout was coming. Across the Atlantic, the temptation Jack feared in his son was already erupting. Kyle Abbott, meant to be focusing on stability, fatherhood, and damage control after recent romantic failures, had once again found himself within Audra Charles's gravitational pull. It wasn't supposed to happen. He had resisted admirably, perhaps even heroically, considering Audra's charm, her cunning, her ability to weaponize vulnerability. But Nice had changed things. The confinement, the danger, the secrets. It stirred old fires. And this time, Kyle didn't resist. One stolen glance turned into a kiss. One touch into a night. And when morning broke over the Riviera, they weren't just lovers, they were co-conspirators. In lust, in silence, in betrayal. Kyle didn't know what it meant yet. Audra did. She always did. Every move she made was calculated. And this one, this seduction, had been more than desire. It had been strategy. If Cain fell, if Dumas collapsed, Audra wanted a survivor by her side. And Kyle, broken and beautiful, fit perfectly into that role. But trouble was brewing fast. Amanda Sinclair, furious and unafraid, confronted Cain in the aftermath of the stabbing. Her voice cut through the lies like a scalpel. She demanded the truth. Did he kill Damien? Was this planned? Was the poisoned wine a feint, or had the knife simply come faster? Cain, cornered, deflected. He spoke in riddles. He turned questions back on her. But Amanda, sharp and burning, wasn't just gathering answers. She was preparing a case. And Sharon Newman, back in Genoa City, sensed something was wrong. Nick's messages had stopped. The updates were vague. The tension in his last voicemail had chilled her to the bone. She tried contacting Adam. Nothing. She turned to Victor. He listened, silently, then nodded once. "We protect our own," he said. Sharon didn't know what that meant, not yet. But she knew she had to act. And when Sharon moves, people follow. Victor Newman, meanwhile, had already begun pulling strings. The Dumas scandal threatened not just Cain, but the entire business ecosystem surrounding Chancellor, Newman Media, and the fragile balance of power in Genoa City. If Adam exposed the truth too soon, chaos would follow. If Jack and Billy imploded simultaneously, power would shift. Victor moved behind the scenes, freezing accounts, manipulating markets, silencing leaks. His priority wasn't Cain. It was legacy. His family. His name. As the week barreled toward disaster, lines were drawn. Phyllis, now the keeper of a terrible truth, debated her next move. Amanda, armed with evidence, considered betrayal. Sharon, restless and determined, plotted rescue. Nick, shattered by what he saw, faced a moral crossroads. Kyle, tangled in sheets and lies, realized he was no longer a bystander. And Audra? She simply watched it all unfold, smiling. And in a quiet corner of the garden, the blood had dried, but the stain remained. For the first time in years, Lily Winters had allowed herself to hope again. After everything, after the betrayals, the heartbreak, the battles she thought she'd buried, Damien Cain had arrived in her life like a whisper of something steady. Their connection wasn't rushed or reckless. It had grown organically, through shared pain and unspoken understanding. There was a calm in Damien that Lily had craved, a quiet resolve that felt like safety in a world full of deceit. She hadn't expected love, not after everything Cain had put her through, but it had bloomed nonetheless, delicate, new, and tragically short-lived. Because now, Damien was dead. It wasn't just that he had died. It was how. Violently. Silently. In the shadows of a beautiful garden drenched in sunlight and secrets. Lily had heard the scream. She had rushed toward it, heart pounding, already knowing something had gone terribly wrong. And when she saw the blood, the twisted posture of Damien's body sprawled across stone and soil, she couldn't breathe. She dropped to her knees, fingers trembling, unable to find a pulse or even form a coherent thought. But even then, one image was burned into her mind, the last person seen with Damien alive, Cain. What had started as confusion quickly hardened into fury. Cain had lied too many times. He had drawn everyone to this estate in nice under false pretenses. He had isolated them, manipulated them, cut off all contact with the outside world. And now Damien was dead. Coincidence? Lily couldn't believe in coincidences anymore. Especially not when, only hours earlier, she had finally told Cain the truth, that she and Damien were together. That they had moved beyond friendship. That she had chosen someone else. The look in Cain's eyes then, raw, wounded, and dark, haunted her. Now, with Damien lying cold in the ground, it terrified her. So when Chancellor arrived, called in as an emergency liaison from the U.S. to assist French authorities, Lily didn't hesitate. She gave her statement calmly, factually, but with one devastating piece of information. The moment she told Cain about her relationship with Damien had occurred right before the murder. Chance listened without flinching, his detective instincts already engaged. Cain had motive. He had opportunity. And in the eyes of the law, that was enough to warrant serious scrutiny. Meanwhile, Cain was falling apart. Not visibly. Outwardly, he maintained the same polished mask he always wore. But inside, he was crumbling. Damien's death hadn't been part of his plan, at least not like this. He hadn't intended for violence. Control, yes. Intimidation, certainly. But not murder. Or so he told himself. Because truth and illusion had long since blurred for him. The persona of Aristotle Dumas, the calculated figure he had used to rebuild himself from the ashes, had no place for sentiment. And yet, Damien had been different. Damien had been loyal, efficient, obedient, until he wasn't. And that, more than anything, had made him a liability. Now, faced with Chance's questions and Lily's gaze, Cain was forced into a position he despised, defense. He had always preferred to dictate the terms, to lead the narrative. But this time, the story wasn't his to control. Chance had the facts, the timeline, and Lily's testimony. What he didn't have, yet, was proof. So Cain played the only card he had left, denial. He claimed he had tried to stop Damien from leaving the estate. That they argued, yes, but only because Damien had become unstable. He painted a picture of a man unraveling, a man tormented by secrets and regret. He said Damien had been acting erratic for days, that his paranoia had reached dangerous levels. Cain even claimed to fear for his own safety. But the cracks in his defense were already visible. The surveillance system Cain had installed, allegedly for privacy, conveniently malfunctioned during the time of the murder. Guests began whispering that Cain had argued with Damien more than once. And then there was the wine. Damien's strange behavior earlier in the week, the way he had stumbled, gasped, accused Cain of poisoning him. At the time, it had seemed like paranoia. But now, it felt like a prophecy. Chance took it all in with the calm of a man who had seen guilt wear many masks. He didn't accuse Cain. Not directly. But he circled him like a hawk, asking the same questions from different angles, watching for inconsistencies. And they came. Little ones. Enough to raise red flags. The kind of inconsistencies that stack like bricks, until the wall of innocence begins to collapse. Behind closed doors, Victor Newman began exerting pressure as well. He didn't care about Cain's innocence or guilt. What mattered to Victor was containment. Scandal threatened his business empire, and with Chancellor tangled up in this disaster, Victor wasn't about to let it implode without intervention. He made calls. Pulled strings. And when that didn't work, he made threats. Quiet ones. But Cain understood the message: either fix this, or disappear. Back in Genoa City, Sharon Newman tried to help Nick recover from the trauma of what he'd seen. He was haunted by Damien's eyes, by the blood, by the eerie calm on Cain's face. Nick wanted to believe in due process. But in his gut, he believed Cain had done it. And that belief, once planted, would not fade. Amanda Sinclair, too, refused to sit on the sidelines. She began building a legal case, not as defense but as opposition. She had the files Damien had secretly sent her, the records of Cain's offshore transactions, the metadata from encrypted emails that hinted at Cain's obsession with controlling Lily's future. Amanda was preparing for trial, even before charges had been filed. The tension at the Dumas estate boiled over as alliances shifted. Phyllis, still rattled from what she had witnessed, avoided Cain entirely. Audra and Kyle, now exposed and uneasy after their secret liaison, distanced themselves from the drama, though Kyle's guilt about Lily's grief was palpable. And Lily? She withdrew into herself, mourning Damien in silence, while silently awaiting the day Cain would finally be forced to face justice. And then came the news. The coroner's report confirmed Damien had been stabbed from behind. The angle suggested surprise. There were no defensive wounds. But traces of a sedative were also found in his bloodstream, enough to slow reaction, not kill. Combined with the poisoning theory, it painted a picture of calculated assault. Not passion. Not rage. Premeditation. Chance presented the findings to Cain in a quiet room overlooking the sea. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply placed the evidence on the table and said, "This is what we know. Now tell me what you haven't said." Cain looked out over the cliffs, his face a mask of stoicism. But his hands trembled slightly, just enough to betray what words never could. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of the estate, the final piece of the puzzle waited to emerge. Perhaps a witness. Perhaps a recording. Perhaps the killer themselves, still hiding in plain sight. But one thing was certain, Cain Ashby's time was running out.